Alrighty. Yeah, that's a good start.
Nice. All right.
Yeah. So
you can introduce yourself first, and then I can say a little bit about myself.
Yeah, that's a good start.
Let's go.
Yeah, so my name is Seb. I was previously a technical lead for Kotlin multi-platform, and I'm now working in a team called Kotlin in Fleet. And I am here to find out about what makes Flutter great with my friend Julian. So Julian, tell about yourself.
Amazing. I'm Julian, and I'm a mobile developer and agency founder from Munich. And the reason I'm talking with Seb today is because we mainly use Flutter for all of our apps. And we can maybe have a short discussion on why it's so great.
Yeah.
What is so nice. And I think I have some stuff to tell.
Maybe as an additional bit of context is that I'm a believer in that we as like JetBrains should treat our competition as like something to be respected and something that we should learn about and be very well aware of what makes it great and what makes other people enjoy other technologies. And I know that you have been working on Flutter stuff since, 2018, 19, almost since forever.
Yeah.
I think we even there's one fun anecdote, which is that I think I once wrote a small tutorial on Flutter, even in 1.0 alpha. Like it was not even stable, right? It was an alpha version of Flutter, and I wrote an article, and that was a time where we did not even know about each other. And you read the article, and we found out about this, I think years afterwards. And that was a coincidence because we were already working for the same company, which is called QuickBird Studios, for at least a year. And then it just happened that we realized that, hey, yeah, we have read about each other's stuff.
I think it was one of a very old app that you wrote, and you took it as an example. And I think it was just very, very basic, like creating a button navigation bar and stuff like this.
No, it was much cooler. I think the article was called "Building a Social Network in Flutter." It's like talking about overstatements.
Okay, maybe I just I just kept the button navigation bar stuff in my head.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, but it was a nice app, to be honest. And I think the article that you wrote was also something that highlighted why Flutter was so cool, because I think you built the stuff on Android before natively.
Yes.
And then you started to build a prototype in Flutter quite fast, if I remember correctly.
It was crazy fast. I remember that I was building the Android app for months, and then within a few days, I was able to have the same UI, or basically the same UI in Flutter. And the reason why I chose Flutter was because back then I just had a Dell XPS 13, and I did not have a MacBook, obviously, because I was a poor student. And I just built the app for Android, testing on Android, and I think I used some friend, like a friend of my brother. He had a Mac, and I just borrowed it from time to time and checked if it runs on iOS. And it did. This was the crazy part about it. It just worked. And this is really cool. And it was not a stable thing there. It already worked great.
That was also quite surprising. I think our first... or the first experience from me and my co-founder, Stefan, was also somewhat similar. Like we were working on like a small side project, and we started to have like a Android MVP. I think it was a time tracking app back then, like a toy project, also to learn. And then I told him about, hey, I saw this new technology. Let's check that out together. And we were I think we were just sitting in a Starbucks, and I was hey, and then you can just run it, change some stuff, and it's immediately shown on the screen. And I still remember our insanely stupid estimation that we can get the whole thing done in a week. and he still makes fun of me because of that. But still, we were able to rebuild our MVP quite fast. And I think this was also the first stuff that got us hooked. It's very easy to get something running, to have a few screens, go back and forth, and not worry about anything else. Literally, like you set this stuff up, and then you just go with it, and that's what gets most people hooked. Of course, there are downsides. We can maybe talk about them later. But I think this is what gets people into the ecosystem in the first place.
Yeah, let's cut right to the chase. Maybe you can share your screen and we can just look at the getting started part of Flutter. How does it work to set up a new Flutter project? What is the workflow? Because for Kotlin, we right now have a web wizard that you can configure, but I would be interested in learning how you use Flutter. And oh yeah, I see. First of all, it's nice. Thank you. You're using IntelliJ.
Yeah, I mean, I was an Android developer, so
yeah, great. Thank you. I'm not sure what is your estimate? How many people are using IntelliJ for Flutter, or is it more and more common to see people using VS Code or something else? Like I think there's Flutter Flow, a web way of, or like a website of building Flutter apps.
Yeah, I think the Flutter team even published some numbers that we can look up, but there are definitely a lot of people using VS Code. I think we still have the good old Android developers that are sticking to the good IDEs, or VS Code is also a good IDE. But yeah, that's also one of the cool things. We can set up a new project, and I can show you once how we did it with the wizard, and then you can also just do it with the command line tools.
Yeah, that would be nice.
Because those are very, very nice. Alrighty, so let's first do it with the command line tool. It's very, very straightforward. I already have a directory here. Let's create a new one. I don't know, let's go just
why Flutter awesome, like it.
And then essentially what you do is you run FVM Flutter create. FVM is a prefix for a version manager, like similar to the Gradle wrapper. Maybe you can drop that entirely. I just have it installed, so you can also just do Flutter create.
Okay.
And I'm just gonna do I don't know my
FVM is also maintained by Google's Flutter team, or is it a
no? FVM is a third party. It's essentially what it does. It's just making sure that you have multiple Flutter versions installed.
Okay.
And then you can easily switch between them. That's essentially it. So we just go ahead, we say Flutter create, and then the main name of the project, and then it just sets everything up for you. You are able to configure the platforms if you want. We now just have the default platforms.
Which I guess is iOS and Android?
It's even, I think it's also macOS. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
We can, let's just open that up and check out the folder structure, because that's, it's also web.
Oh, okay. They're going for it.
Yeah, so they literally start with everything that is stable or that is able to run on your machine. I think maybe it's also Windows, but it's a Mac. So, but we have Android, iOS, Mac OS, obviously test and web. The folder structure is entirely the same compared to the project that I've opened in the background. But this is one way of creating this, and then obviously you also have the option to just create a new project here and go select Flutter, select your SDK, and then you just have a wizard. And here you can just see what all the platforms have. You're also able to select the language that you want to write on a native side. So you can go with Kotlin or Java.
Just as a small interruption, I'm pretty sure this is something we should also then talk about on how does it work for us if we actually want to bridge into native territory and have to write something in native code. But yeah, so I see you can select Java and Kotlin. That's exactly. It's a nice wizard so far.
And I think that's basically if I know how to create, then we will end up with the same project that we have here as well. Exactly. Besides that, the only or the first thing that you will look into is probably the lib folder. And I think for most people, this is also the folder that they will stay in for, I think, the first, I don't know, let's say hours or days that they write Flutter code.
This is where you would put most of your shared code, right? So if I want to have code that is available on all of those platforms, iOS, macOS, Android, web, then I would just put it in this lib folder. It's like a shared module, right?
Exactly. So that will always be Dart. We can look into platform channels and how to access native APIs and just a bit.
But you would essentially get this project that you have open right now. This is called now Why Flutter Awesome, and this is what the wizard would spit out.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
So nothing was changed here. I just started it so we don't wait for build times.
Yeah.
But that's it. They also give you some guidance here on how the stuff works. They also tell you, hey, please maybe change something. Give it a hot reload.
Their wizard is also okay. This is quite nice. I see that the wizard is not just putting out some code, but it also puts in a lot of like, hey, here's where you would like to probably change something. I can see that.
Yeah, and that's just, I don't know. For me, as someone that started with this from a very long time ago, I just delete all the comments. But if you're just entirely lost and you just want to play around, I think it's quite nice guidance. And that's also kind of cool. We can just change something. Now, what I did, I pressed Command S, and the tooling behind it, the plugin will then hot reload it automatically. You can also trigger hot reload manually, but essentially whenever I save, I set that up in IntelliJ in the settings, it just hot reloads. So now we change the color to green, and you can immediately see that on the right. Color is now green.
So the right side is effectively an iOS simulator that you have currently open.
Exactly.
And you can also just press button, like I assume now if you press this plus button on the simulator, you will get like, how often you pressed. Now, if you change back the color to blue, we will still see that the value will be 8, but it is now blue. This is absolutely crazy. How do you know how this works under the hood? Like how is Flutter able to pull something off like this?
So essentially what is kind of cool, I mean, in the past I did obviously some Android development and some iOS development, and you guys obviously have previews for the UI, so you can, develop the UI a little bit faster. Flutter has the same way with hot reload, but essentially what is different is that you are able to literally, let's explain it in a very simplified way. You're able to hot swap different parts of your code. And then what the tool also does, it just gives you like a refresh of the UI. I'm simplifying things here now, but essentially this is what's happening. So let's just imagine I'm going here, changes this to red, hit save. It will switch out this kind of line of code or the entire function. And then it will just call the refresh of the UI. So if we just go in here and print something, we just write, hello, this is build method, and I'm changing something here and hit the hot reload button. No, I'm not saving, I'm pressing the button. You will first see that we're syncing files. You can also see that the build method is called again. So we're refreshing the UI, and then it tells me, hey, I reloaded some of your libraries.
Yeah, and I assume this is possible because there's a strong separation between what is the state in Flutter and what is the widget tree that builds up the UI, right? So it knows if you swap out the code that builds the UI, it can still keep the state as long as you do not change functions, I guess. And it can just rerun the code that builds the UI, and it will just show that and keep everything else. How does it work if you change actually something that is a function that was previously used and you break it, or like you change something in the state objects, can you still hot reload in that?
So let's first start with the function that is quite okay. That's kind of interesting. So let's say we are going to this will also work. If I can also just entirely hot reload functions, that should also work. Maybe you can explain a little more what you mean with a function, because I think you're always looking at this from a somewhat Kotlin native perspective.
Definitely. Yes.
So I assume you wanna have a very specific example. So guide me a little bit.
Yeah, okay.
What exactly do you want to switch?
I don't know. Let's say if we switch out there's probably something, this onPress function or some function that you have written in your code that does some calculation like, I press this button, now I need to take the count and add 1 to it. And if I would, add a parameter to such a function, would the hot reload still be able to do this? Or as a second question, if I have the state object, like how does the state work here? We have a state object. Who is currently holding this like value 8 that we see on screen?
Okay, so something that we maybe have to understand first is that we don't just like let's imagine it like this. When we change something here, for example, imagine you're literally just swapping that piece of code or reloading that piece of code, and then you're just rerunning the build method. This means that, of course, everything that you currently keep in memory still is in memory, and of course your state object is still in memory, and you're just refreshing the UI. So we are not, I don't know, rebuilding or destroying some UI tree or restarting the app. You're literally just swapping out functions, objects, classes, whatever, and then you're triggering a refresh. And then, of course, you will invoke something again that was hot reloaded. So everything that is in a build method. If I change this to red, you run it again, build method is called, this is now red, and then it's just like a simple UI update.
Yeah.
If we, for example, go into the, let's say this increment method, just use that here. And now I am going here for counter minus minus, so we decrease the value. And again, I'm just hot reloading. It means now that this function, this piece of code will now be loaded into the Dart VM. And I'm just keeping the state. Again, we're not recreating the entire application. So that is still there. And if I now press this button, you can see we're going down. And this is, I mean, very, very cool for UI. And I think this is where you catch most people. But what we see here is that we also change business logic. And let's say, again, if we look from this from an Android or Kotlin native perspective, maybe it's similar to like also having this kind of hot reload for everything, but not just the UI. Like you have your view model, for example. Let's say this is an API request, and we're firing that API request, and maybe we did something wrong, like we have a typo in our URL. Based on where it is, you might have to completely recompile and restart your application. In Flutter, that's not the case. You can just go ahead, change that, run the request again, and then if it fails, it fails.
Oh, that means like I mean, you know that I have a lot of strange hobby projects, but one thing I often have issues with is like getting the HTTP requests right. And to me, this sounds like a really nice feature, as in like I can indeed just change a little bit how I do the HTTP request. I'm still on the page that does the triggering of the request. I don't know, I press a button, it should fire something to the server. And you said to me that I could theoretically just tune this code that does the HTTP request, hot reload, press the button again, and see if the server now is happy with my requests. That is, I imagine this to be a huge time saver, because as you probably assume, when you do the same thing in a Kotlin application, you need to rebuild, or let's say Kotlin multi-platform, because I think for Android there is also some hot reload working that we can offer. But let's say multi-platform, you want to do the same thing on iOS, you would right now need to rebuild the application, navigate to the screen again, and then fire. Or you do the proper thing and write tests for it. But who does that?
Yeah, come on.
Not going to do that.
Fuck no. Nah. It's, I mean, of course, but I think if you just wanna, it's also a little bit about of course, at some point you will eventually write tests, and that also is, I would say, somewhat easy, but you also have to keep in mind that it's quite powerful when debugging something, because let's say that depends on how much time we have, and we can do that later. We can just parse some code, and I can just go in, put a breakpoint there, look at the debugger, see what fields they are, and then just write the parsing. Okay, there are tools for writing the code to parse some stuff, but I think you get the idea. I can just be in the debugger, look at the variables, look at the codes, and while I look at the code, adjust my code, and then it's just literally one click again.
You can attach a debugger. With a debugger, you have a breakpoint, and then you do a hot reload, so the code after the breakpoint changes.
I will no. I will just no. I will just let the I will let the stuff run.
Okay.
And then because I can just trigger it so easily, I will hot reload and run it again.
Okay, because that would have blown my mind if you're able to just stop the code at a certain point, look at the values. Basically, you could write something like an arrow function, and then you just stop right before you throw the arrow, and then you're like, I now know what to do, and then you write line by line and push it to the device.
Not sure if that technically works, but that's definitely not what we are doing. Also would be a kind of strange workflow, but hey, I'm down. If we're able to push the boundaries, technically, why not? Yeah, but that's essentially what is so powerful. Yeah, I mean, we could go into an example.
Yeah, I would be also interested. Like, first thing I would be interested is it somewhat fair to say that this is the typical Flutter workflow? You have a simulator or your device next to you, and you're mostly working by hot reloading stuff. So if you work on UI, you constantly just like you open the screen, you constantly hot reload. You do not have something like a static preview. You would always have some live running application that you hot reload, and you just fine tune until you like it. And as we can see, the hot reload right now in the sample project that we have is almost instant. You do the change, it almost instantly hot reloads. So the first question is that workflow what you expect from most people to do? And the second question is, how does the performance of the hot reload change if you have huge projects? I know you have also huge projects. Is it still instant, or is it getting slower and slower?
So for the first question, I think that's basically the default workflow of most Flutter developers. It's somewhat like static previews, like you see it or somewhat dynamic also previews, like you see it in SwiftUI or Compose. I think there are some experiments by people and maybe some plugins that do that, because I think it's kind of cool to have a preview of your component in different variations, and there are tools around it. But again, those are just additionally. I would say the average or most Flutter developers can live without those tools and just do everything with hot reload. And I think that's also what most more people do. Second question about performance of the hot reload. It gets a little slower with the size of the project. That's definitely happening, but it's still at a point where it's absolutely still amazing to use. Like, I'm not sitting there waiting 3 seconds for a hot reload. I think the slowest was a second or two. But again,
if I just want to push or like do a commit in like one of our huge repositories, just the command like git commit takes me 10 to 15 seconds from time to time. So hearing you having a hot reload within a second or two, wow, that's
okay. But also I think at your scale, if a git add takes so long, that's a different level. But it's essentially for most projects, it's still very good. I'm not saying that hot reload does not have problems or had problems in the past. There were definitely times where hot reload was not so reliable, and where also the DX was just not great in the beginning. And again, just keep in mind, I'm talking as a Mac OS user.
Okay.
Like, we had other people in the teams that experienced some issues on Windows. But right now, the state of hot reload is very, very good. And I still remember the Flutter team also doing like a, how do you say it? They were collecting feedback on how reliable hot reload works, because I think the whole, it's something that you have to get right in most cases, because if you cannot trust a hot reload, it gets a little annoying. Like, just imagine you hot reload something and it tells you, hey, I hot reloaded, and still the change is not visible. And then you have to like rerun the application just to be sure, because otherwise you might be wasting time, because you're trying new things, see if your bug problem goes away and nothing happens, and then you're not sure, is it me, is it the hot reloading? Then the whole stuff breaks.
Yeah, you know the meme where it's like this Vietnam person that sees all this war thing going on in his head. I have this moment because I remember back in the time, and you probably remember too, when I think Android Studio 3 had first shipped its like apply changes feature. And it's like,
Yeah.
I remember spending so much time in my life working on something and thinking to myself, I mean, I was a beginner back then, right? And I was sitting there and I was trying to fix something. Trying to figure out why something doesn't work. And just after hours and hours, I figured out like, yeah, my changes were never running on device. Like they were never shipped. Like I was always debugging something strange.
Yeah. And then the frustration kicks in, and you be like, "Alrighty, I'm not touching this stupid ass hot reload feature anytime."
And I think they fixed it in Android Studio, but still, I heard a lot of people not trusting it because they have been so burned by it. So I would say if some technology ships a feature like this, it is very easy to fuck it up and then just lose the trust, right?
Yeah, that's definitely the case. But also, to be fair, right now the hot reload is quite perfect, and I think it's supported on all platforms. I think web still has some issues with hot reload, but it's also kind of cool if we just run the same stuff on macOS and then we also have hot reload. That's very, very cool.
Can we actually run this app on macOS and see how this would work for us?
Yeah, we can just give that a try. Just go macOS and give it a run. Haven't tried it out.
Let's see if it just spits out and executes on macOS straight away. Then it's really impressive. If there's some issue, then I would be actually kind of relieved.
No, I think it will spit out just the macOS and run it. Yeah, there we are.
Yeah, that's really.
And it's also, I have to say, it's kind of cool to be able to have a macOS application running. And in most cases, I also usually keep the macOS, even though I'm maybe not shipping a macOS application, just because it's kind of cool to just test out different layout sizes. Because obviously my simulator is kind of limited, but if I just want to see, hey, does it overflow if I'm on a very small device and then I'm just doing this? So that's kind of cool on the upside. Of course, at some point it gets a little annoying to maintain the macOS application. If you, for example, start to set up Firebase and everything, you also have to keep in mind to look at the native macOS target and maybe configure something there, and then you drop it. But in the beginning, it's very, very nice to just prototype some UI.
Yeah, I actually think this. If I would start building a new KMP application right now, I would personally, even if I don't care about a JVM desktop target and I just want to ship iOS and Android apps, I would still add a JVM target and compile my code for desktop JVM just for this, like a similar workflow where I can look at the UI and on my machine on the desktop, and I can resize the window quite nicely and see if it works. And also, I think right now there would be good technologies on how we could do hot reloading on desktop JVM. And I think I don't remember the name of the tech, but there is hot reload on JVM. It's not integrated into Compose as it right now is like integrated, or like how Flutter is integrated into the simulators and your application here. But it would still work to hot reload stuff.
If you then also can maintain the state like Flutter does, I think that's already an amazing improvement of the X. I think as soon as you leave the Dart boundaries, you will eventually experience I'd say the old workflow with like killing your application, compiling it again. Because of course, as soon as you have changes in Kotlin or Swift code, you will have to run it again, obviously.
Yeah.
But everything on Dart, that should work.
Let's assume you would be forced. I don't know. You told me once that you might have some project in the pipeline that is using Kotlin multi-platform that you would take over from another company, probably because they messed up. I don't know. And then they need to get the professionals in, like, you know how it works. And then you're forced to use KMP, right? And or like I don't want to say you're forced using KMP, but you're happy customer of a KMP project. I don't know, user. And you see that we currently heavily invest in like getting previews done. Like we're having a few engineers working on it, and they are quite clever, and they have some great ideas. For example, one of the ideas that is floating around in JetBrains is that we could have those previews compiled, even though the rest of your code is not compilable. So you're currently in the middle of the, let's do it like this. We are working together on the code base. You and me, we're connected on Fleet or IntelliJ, and we're just both typing like monkeys, like we're productive. We write in code and code and code. So it means that your project might not always compile. And maybe you're just in the middle of something and some functions don't compile, but the function, or like the composable, comparable to Flutter's widget, it would still compile. And the idea that we have floating around is that we would still be able to have a compiler configuration in Kotlin that just takes the code. It knows that there are errors. It knows that there's some bodies of functions that are not right. But it knows that, yeah, who cares? Like, we just want to show you some preview of the function you're currently working in, so we can just compile this function, emit the bytecode, and everything else that is not compilable, sure, like the syntax of like the headers, like functions, and the resolve of those functions, those things need to work. So you cannot just have like some gibberish in your code, because maybe it would change the resolve and you would call into an entirely different function. But if you're just working inside the body of a function, you have some stupid things in there, it shouldn't matter. And then we would be able to show you previews quite quickly, and like even if the rest of the code doesn't compile. All of this is really nice, but I would say that it probably, in this hypothetical case of you taking over Campion, even if we pulled this off, I would still say that the Flutter experience has some things that this previews cannot offer, which is this interactivity. You can just press a button, also test the business logic, how it integrates. You can much more easily debug animations. So would you think that our investment in the previews is justified, or would you think that if JetBrains does not deliver some hot reload like this, it will always be some kind of a downgrade in developer experience?
Okay, that's a very, very tricky question to answer, because I'm answering this just purely from my experience and what my workflow currently is in all of the projects that we have. And also it depends on what you guys want to do with Fleet, because of course, one of the core things in Fleet is that you work together with multiple people, and then the state of my project is partly broken and I still want to work. This is definitely a use case, I assume, because I'm not using any like code with me features right now. But if I'm just looking at how we work, I don't think that this specific use case, like something is broken and I still want to be able to have a preview, that this would be super, super valuable to me. Something that is a lot more valuable is just having hot reload when everything compiles. And especially if let's say you have a complete new project that you're working on, or you just, let's say you have a completely new project that you're working on. It really depends on how you get into your project, but I think something that is quite cool to see is, hey, I'm changing something just to test if is this the right part of the code where I am. Here again, the example that we have is like very, very simple. It's just one file. But just imagine you have like a huge code base. You have different kind of UI components, and just want to see, am I at the right spot? Is this the right part of the UI where I'm now going to change something? There are some tools here, for example, where I can just say, I have some kind of an inspector that just leave that out of the way first.
Yeah,
but
can we look into this? This is really cool.
Yeah, just a second. And then changing some stuff in the project and getting familiar with what does this do. That is also kind of cool if you can just do this with hot reload. Like, hey, I'm just gonna change something here, see what kind of effect it has. Alrighty, okay, now cool, change it back, and then learn a little bit how to get into the project.
One thing to add here is like, I think this idea of being able to also preview code that doesn't compile is not only for the collaborative mode, but it's also for multi-platform. It's important for multi-platform because of another reason, which is that you might write your code in common code, and you might say like, here's like a small expect function, like I need to bridge into native territory here and there, and maybe you have not implemented everything for Android yet. So you have written some expect function, but you never provided the actual. But it doesn't matter for this particular preview in your common code. And we would still be able to show the preview despite your project not actually linking everything up and saying like, yeah, here's your expect, here's your actual. And what the compiler then would just do is, here's an expect function. You have not implemented it on Android, which you're currently previewing. So if you at runtime call into it, it just shows you like, yes, sorry, like you probably want to provide this implementation. And if you don't call into it, like fair enough, you get a preview.
Yeah, but I mean that is quite. I mean, yeah, I get the idea, but on the other side, if let's say I'm writing the expect function, like, hey, expect, give me a UUID, and then I don't care about Android, so compiler would yell at me. I try to hot reload. Compiler tells me, hey, there's a compile issue. I'm just writing the actual function we were to do, and then it throws if it gets called, but I can just move on. If that saves you like multiple months of development time. I mean, you know.
Yeah, I got the point.
But of course, again, just from my perspective, I also did some Kotlin native development just recently. I again just checking out. I'm regularly checking out all the states of Kotlin native, Kotlin multi-platform SwiftUI, also to see what the competitors do. And in that case, it was just fine. Like the IDE support is quite nice. I just bring up the context menu, say, generate it for me. You give me an implementation that throws by default, I assume, and then I just move on. So that's just the take on this one, but I'm sure there are many other different use cases. I think, again, like generally talking developer experience, having like good, you obviously know this, but having like good error messages is key, I assume. So if you cannot hot reload something, then yeah,
there we were I remember a few weeks ago us trying to fix some linker issues together and like completely getting frustrated. Like, But just for the record, we both acknowledged that it was not a Kotlin native issue because a Kotlin native heavily compiled, but then it was like the native toolchain that in the end didn't like to link it for whatever.
Yeah, it was. I was linking SQLite 3. Oh boy. Yeah, that was insanely stupid.
Insert the meme here again.
Yeah. But I think there are also like the Flutter community. I think some of them have different or similar problems where you don't really know that much about Android or iOS natively, and then you start with a Flutter project and everything is cool, and then at some point you hit like an iOS pod problem or maybe a Gradle issue or a null pointer on Java. I'm just making up examples, but you get the point.
Yeah.
Then for some people, they have native experience. For them, it's quite easy. For other people, they're like, already, I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
But I think,
Yeah, can we look into those kind of tools because they seem super advanced? And I would be very interested in your comment on these tools like this Flutter Inspector, this just additional tools around the framework. And the thing I'm especially interested in is which of those tools do you think are really essential? Like if I would take them away from you, you would feel a huge hit in productivity.
I think in this case, I'm not the best example because many of the tools here that you see, I'm not using them actively.
Many of the tools are here to help you if you write broken code. I don't write broken code.
Exactly. I never have bugs, so why are we?
No. I don't use that shit.
Print statements for the win. Now, the reason I'm not using the inspector that much is just because in the past it was quite often broken, and also in different parts of the like we, for example, had quite a few projects where we had a lot of different modules and packages in there, and then you could see that the plugins that I have here in IntelliJ, and again, just talking about the Flutter plugin for IntelliJ, it just stops to work. So I just maybe also unintentionally removed it from my workflow because I was like, okay, it's not working anyways, and I come up with other stuff. But there were smaller projects where I used these tools some time ago, and I think for like beginners or intermediates, it's kind of cool to have this visual representation of the tree, where you can then also just jump to.
Wow.
So we can just maybe go through this really quickly. You basically have a representation of a of your UI tree, a little bit optimized, and you're also able to just click somewhere, and then it just lets you jump to the widget. So, for example, this column that we see right here, I can click on that. It just jumps to line 93, and I can just see where it is. I can do some adjustments and go on. Same for the app bar, for example. If I just want to change the text here, I'm just clicking there. I see, okay. It's that title. It's widget.title. Let's see, where does the title come from? Okay, it's injected here, and then you can just change it and be like, hello world, give it a hard reload. And there we are. And this is then, where you can also see it's.
Yeah, and you can reload the widget tree on the right top corner, right? And then, you see hello world. And you know what I also noticed, which I think is really cool, is that you get this blue bar below this Flutter inspector, and it says like, read the docs, watch a tutorial. It's like, am I right? Like, I even in the time when it was not even a stable tech, I felt that the docs they had and like videos and materials they put out, this was like, I've never in my entire professional career have seen something that was similar to it. And I mean it in a positive way, because I thought that getting started with Flutter was one of the easiest things I ever, like, it was the easiest technology to pick up.
I agree.
That I had always learned, like ever learned. I don't know. Yeah.
It's also something that what I really love, and I know many people value, is that everything in the framework is obviously open source, but the cool thing is I can just command click into the implementation, and here in the implementation, again, the Flutter team does an amazing job on telling you how to use the widget. So, for example, here we have a very simple widget, but if we just look up here, it tells you, of course, some documentation. Mm-hmm. They have links to YouTube videos explaining you additional stuff.
To like this particular widget. What is the widget that it's a floating action button. And they have a video posted here in the documentation that tells you more additional content and like context about like how to use this. And
I mean, you can just maybe
let's look it up.
Yeah, so they have different kind of series on
how cool is that?
And something that is also very, very cool is that they also give you some guidance on how to use different things. This is like, hey, this is a widget, this is what it does. But they recently also started to give you like technique of the week or something like this, where they also talk about common problems. And I think a very good example is the Future Builder, which was just a widget that many people just used wrong. Mm-hmm. And then they did a let's maybe just use for future search for Future Builder 5 years ago, and I think they did another video where they talked about the Future Builder again. Maybe it was on another. Okay.
Yeah, maybe it's on a different account.
Yeah, let's see. Maybe it's on the Flutter account, Future Builder Flutter. Yeah, here they covered it again.
Yeah.
And they just, again, they've seen that many people struggle. And here you can see it was take 2. Maybe we can go back a little bit. There you go. It's take two. Because they saw that many people have problems with the Future Builder, and then they did another resource and documenting the stuff. Something that's also kind of cool is they give you some cross-references, because maybe you were looking at the floating action button, but it's not quite the right thing to use for your case. And then they suggest you other widgets, and this quite often helped me. And that's very, very cool. One example that I would also like to show you, maybe it's in the scaffold. Exactly. They also give you some more code highlights and code examples. Yeah. Here, for example, they give you like a very just an example. Hey, how are you going to use this with a tab controller, for example? And you can literally just copy and paste this, give it a run, and have something with a specific use case. And again, here, for example, the scaffold is if we now look into the screen, it's just this, I don't know, like, the scaffold of a page, and they link you everything that you can do with this. Like, hey, do you want to show a message? There you go. or in this case, here a message to show snack bar, the app bar, bottom app bar, and so on. And so you can literally just, read the docs.
Yeah,
link material.
One thing I always felt when I was working with Flutter is that I think it's fair to say that the Flutter team is not only good in building a UI framework, which is like one set of skills, but they seemingly are also good in building actually UIs with their framework, meaning they have opinions on like how to use that, and those opinions are quite well educated. It's not that they are just like really good in building this UI framework and then they are like, but the community will figure out how to use it properly and they will figure out what are the best practices. To a certain extent, likely the community also contributes to what is the best practice. But I still remember 2018 when I was using Flutter and for my hobby project there, I already back then had this impression that the Flutter team was very intentional on why they do things, how this should be used, and how this will affect developers in building actually really, really good UIs. And when it comes to other UI frameworks, I have not seen this level of like pushing for like a very consistent story. They have a really strong vision on how this should be done, how things should be used. And then they educate you very well. So it seems like they have found a really good package for their UI framework.
Yeah. I think something that they understood quite well is just this whole, we want to have, when you start with this technology, we want to give you as less friction as possible. Like you should be able to go through the first, 3 pages of your app without any huge and major problems. And there will be certain things that you run into when building layouts, like just the whole how you build layouts with how do columns and rows work, how do constraints work, and all of these concepts, you eventually have to learn them. But again, if you just have a very, very like a problem on how to, how layout works, like you're getting some kind of a constraint issue, you just go to the website and you have like a nice overview on how the whole stuff works.
Yeah,
and I think it's scroll down even more.
Funnily enough, it did not change a lot since 2017 when I was using it, but I don't think it has to change a lot because it was really good back then.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just looking at I just want to find one example where they just explain the different. Okay, I cannot find it very quickly. But anyways, it's documentation-wise very good, perfect. Yeah. Looking at the code, going through it, clicking through it, reading it, also very nice. And then, of course, debugging the code. That's also something that is very cool. Maybe that's not for everybody, but if you just want to see why certain things, crash, because stuff can obviously also crash, not in your code, but in the framework code, and being able to
obviously not in the code you've written. It can crash, not in your code.
When I have crashes, it's always the framework. It's not me.
I see.
But you get the point.
Yeah.
It's kind of cool to just debug the code and also look at this. And this is and I hear this from many intermediate or professionals that are Flutter developers. I think from all Flutter developers that they actually look at the framework code and they learn and apply similar techniques to what the Flutter team does.
Oh, this is such a light bulb moment right now for me, because you see that when you would do the same thing with Kotlin multi-platform, you like once you're in your common main code and you go into the source code from the framework, it is really hard for us to provide a good experience because the source code from the framework is also split. Like you have the common code, but it was compiled for a particular platform. You need to choose what is currently actively running. So you need to pretend this code that was written in SRC, common main, blah, 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 is now viewed from a JVM perspective. And I see that this is a really interesting case. You might want to just go into the framework and just step through the code, learn how it's done, learn what is going on, and maybe even then have a nice experience and seeing like how did they write the code, and maybe I can apply a similar thing to my UIs. And I really think that this is something we have not even thought of, that it is that this is useful to have.
One thing you have to keep in mind is that everything that I'm talking here, I'm talking about the shared start code.
Yeah.
So I assume if you have a Kotlin native library or package or anything, I think you would still be able to just command click into the implementation, read it, and debug it. I think that should work.
Yes,
if I'm right.
yes. You can command click into the implementation and read it. Yeah, but the step to a debugger will get it is not. We did not think of it as a important feature right now because it's not obvious for me to see this workflow where you would actually want to learn about the framework by just going into source code, maybe adding debuggers here and there. But it makes sense.
It makes sense, and it kind of brings me to one of the next things, because like debugging Flutter's framework code sometimes, also if you're just curious on how the things work, not for everybody. Not everybody works like this. This might be also more or less maybe a little special to me, but I love just also debugging the code, getting into the concepts, understanding what it does. And of course, if there's obviously something that is throwing, adding a breakpoint might help. But generally where you see maybe a little more of, hey, I want to debug a certain library, is when you go into third-party dependencies. And again, here, it's also a reason why Flutter is, or maybe Dart in general, is very popular, is because if you have a little bit of friction with your development, you can always just go to pubdev and search for packages
can we look
that do certain things.
Can we look into how pubdev would work and how you would add a dependency? And then I think from there, we have already got a good insight of why it's popular. And one question is it true that if I'm adding a dependency, it is recompiling on your machine? So it's like a source-based dependency. You don't get binaries, you get the source code from that package, and you, like Rust, for example, or other languages and ecosystems, you just download the source code and you recompile it on your machine once, and then you're happy.
Yeah. I mean, maybe we, I don't know, can do a second session on how the native stuff works and platform standards and everything, because I think it gets interesting when you have Android and iOS code, because also you have to download the code, but also somehow get it into your repository. Like, what does it do on iOS natively? What does it do on Android natively? Because you're not just including a binary, it's literally code that I can debug. And again, I can also show you this, because let's say I'm adding a dependency that, for example, gives me the ability to request user's location. I can still debug that Kotlin code and that Swift code if I want to. Again, maybe a little more advanced, but the ability is there, and I can also just adjust it if I want to and play it around. But anyways, let's here go for more. What do we want to? We can maybe just
I don't know.
check.
Let's see if I do. We have something to have. I don't know, downloading images and then caching them. I'm looking at something like, how was the library for Android called Coin? No, not Coin. Like Coin is not a dependency. It's a dependency injection. Let's call it like this.
Yeah, but I mean, let's maybe go with shared preferences.
Let's go shared preferences. That's a good example.
We just wanna persist something. We just wanna persist our counter. Let's go like this.
Here's the pub spec. That is it. This is the equivalent of our build Gradle KTS files, is it? Everything you need to tell Flutter about how you want to build your application is inside this pub spec YAML. Like that's exceptions, but the analogy is right.
Exactly. So there I have version name dependencies, and that's essentially it. I also had assets here. And again, Flutter team does a great job in just documenting all of this. Usually just throw all of these comments out of the way. But they again give you some additional stuff like, hey, if you want to add fonts or assets to your app, here's how you do it. This is quite cool.
So such a nice idea to have this inline documentation of like, hey, here add dependencies here and do things there. And you might want to consider changing this. I think what we right now do in our wizards is we generate this project, and we even do generate some non-trivial code. We set up some things for your build that most people don't need, but a few people might really require, let's say, some advanced settings, but we don't document that. Like, we do not tell the user that, oh yeah, we're setting up this configuration because, like, for most people, like for almost everybody, it's fine. For a few people, this is required. Feel free to delete it, and if everything works, you're good to go. But we just put this into our build.gradle.kts file, and then we're kind of confused, like, oh, why is everybody hating Gradle and thinking that it's so complicated? Yeah, no shit, because like we put a lot of complicated stuff from our wizard into our build files, and nobody knows what this is doing, and so everybody just assumes that it's magical. Right.
Yeah.
And that's okay. I shouldn't rant here. It's like, but
I can understand. I definitely understand what you mean, and I think it's of course valid critique. And many times when I think I have a good example, because when I had like a huge gap of not writing Kotlin native or multi-platform code, just because I didn't had to or didn't want to. And then I looked into Kotlin multi-platform again after, I think, 2 years. I think when it first was stable. And the first thing I did was, alrighty, let's just have a toy project, play around, just to have something.
Yeah.
And I imagine that like just setting up all the Gradle dependencies took quite some time. And as a reference, just go on YouTube and search for a Kotlin multi-platform tutorial. I think there is one guy called Philip Lackner.
yeah, he's awesome. Yeah, I like his videos. He stepped up his video game so hard. He's really professional, and he does great stuff. I know him. Yeah.
Exactly. So first thing I do, look it up. I see, oh, nice. This guy has a German accent. Directly password. Not just kidding. And yeah, then I was watching his tutorial setting up some database, and the first 5 minutes or 3 minutes of the tutorial, that was, all right, we're gonna add this dependency here, change this Gradle configuration there, and that's what we did. And I was following along, and already this was just stupid, then this was outdated, just because, I mean, of course it was a somewhat old video, but I didn't know what, I was a beginner, I would say.
Yeah.
I don't know what are the correct resources, and then the DSL, the Gradle DSL changed, so I wasn't sure if this is the right thing.
Sorry about that.
all good. It makes sense. It makes sense that you of course change it, and it was not stable. So
yeah,
but you get the point. And this, I think, you have somewhat to deal with now, because the resources are out there and they are not dated now. The prospect YAML structure hasn't changed since. I don't know.
It looks like I remember it back from 2018. Like I have my dependencies and I can just add something.
I also don't know if they changed anything at all. At least I don't remember. But again, it's just YAML. You just configure it. YAML also has problems, but I don't care. It's quite easy. So this dependency with shared preferences was now added. What I did, have to be transparent here, I recompiled the app.
Yeah.
And it is definitely required, because shared preferences will give us some Swift and Kotlin code that we have to compile.
Yeah.
Again, we can maybe look into this in the future, but essentially what we now do is first we see, hey, what is supported, straightforward, and then we have an example. We just we're gonna read and write data. We're just gonna copy that.
So this is something that we could call Flutter culture, right? If you're providing such a package, you always give this kinds of information. Like here's an example.
Yeah, that makes sense.
You could do this with any technology, like having this nice documentation. But I think it's somewhat of a culture in Flutter. Is it that you just, if you write a package, you do it in this Flutterish style, and this is really helpful.
Yeah, I mean, usually they have multiple sections, like an installing section. Is there anything to set up? Like you have native stuff that you have to configure. Again, Firebase or push notifications, you have to do something in a native project. Give me a guide on how to set it up.
Yeah.
Of course, also adding the dependency, same thing. Then usually have like a very easy example. If it's UI related, maybe have some screenshot. Not everybody's doing this, but it just, again, it's kind of cool that the community does it, because it's like very, very easy. Yeah, no friction. So I'm just getting the instance now. I'm setting a counter.
And yes, I also want to point out that maybe it's obvious to you and it's obvious to me, but for anybody listening, I think it's fair to point this out. Like, since Flutter is like using a source-based dependency system, there are some distinct advantages, and you mentioned one of it, which is like you can easily just look into the code, and you could just change the code right away there. Like if there's some bug in your dependency, you could theoretically just add it on disk because it's source-based dependency system. But also what is really interesting is it solves this entire problem of binary compatibility, and it shifts it towards like, okay, everything just needs to be source compatible, and it's likely much easier to stay source compatible where it is much more complicated in Kotlin. You see that in Kotlin, for our composable functions, like you usually have like just a huge load of parameters. But every time you add a parameter or you just change the order or something, it breaks because it's like a new signature. So it's not binary compatible. So just maintaining libraries is becoming quite you need to know a lot about how Kotlin actually works under the hood or Java works under the hood. If you want to ship a proper library and be compatible across versions. And that's why Kotlin is introducing some language features like, I think the data params classes, data arc classes, which do this.
Yeah, I've seen it.
But this is something distinct, as in like a really good positive point about having a source-based dependency system. But on the flip side, of course, everything you download, you need to recompile, and so initial compile times might get quite huge.
Yeah, but on the same thing, we don't really care that much about compiling.
Yeah, you compile once, you probably still be in the like. What is a typical compile time for an app? If it's completely clean, it's, let's say, a medium-sized app, 5 people working on it, you probably still compile it in a few minutes, right?
To be honest, I don't know.
Which means that it's fast, because if it would be slow, you would know.
No.
Right?
It's not about it being fast. I don't care if it takes longer, because I'm not doing that quite frequently. I just do this once. Maybe I grab a coffee if it takes very long, or I check my mails, and then when the application is running, I'm just hot reloading the entire time.
I see.
So this is why I don't care. I mean, I haven't noticed huge builds.
No, I mean, I'm pretty sure if it would be really, really slow, you would have noticed. If it takes you 30 minutes, then at some point your coffee gets cold, and then you know.
Yeah, okay. No, we're not talking 30 minutes, but
I see.
My point here is we don't really care about build times being a little slower if it's not something that we have to concurrently run or really run in our dev workflow. This is what my point is here. Alrighty, so essentially what I did now, again, the code is far from being perfect or optimized. I just spit out something to be able to work. Haven't tested it yet. We're just going to give it a try. Going to implement a counter.
While we have been talking, you have written the code to do this example with the share preferences.
Yeah.
In the background. Okay. This is such a,
I will walk you through what it does, but essentially we're just saving this to share preferences. Now, if we rerun it, fingers crossed, it works. Doesn't work. Okay, so that's maybe let's see why. But essentially, I just literally copy and pasted code from pub.dev, initializing shared preferences, and then I'm setting it, and then okay, that was kind of stupid what I did here. I forgot to remove a line that I copied. Let's give it a try again. But what I do is whenever you click the button, I'm persisting the count in the shared preferences with a key, and whenever we start, or if the widget gets shown in its state, I'm loading it initially and setting it here.
Yeah.
So let's give it a second try. I just removed this. This was the line that was there before. Obviously, this just will set the counter to 0. Let's give it another try, and then hit the button a few times, and now we will rerun the app. Again, this is also interesting because this is hot restart, not hot reload. But yeah, it worked. It was not super visible. Let's maybe do a print here just to show that it works.
We can also force close the app with.
Yeah, we can do that. Let's remove that entirely and try it again. Exactly. There was one thing I would like to mention and I forgot it now. Anyways, Yeah, but that's essentially what's how your workflow is with packages. And that's kind of cool. Again, you just have a Dart interface. You don't really care about what's happening under the hood.
Yeah.
And then you just do it. Alrighty. And now the count is 7. We have loaded.
It started.
Yeah.
Damn.
And that's kind of cool.
Yeah,
exactly. One thing that I would like to mention that we haven't talked about yet is the difference between hot restart and hot reload, where a hot restart actually restarts your entire application, but not it restarts your, how do I say it? It restarts your app.
Mm-hmm.
So it means that all your state will be lost.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, you're not like recompiling anything.
Yeah.
But now we only have one screen. We can let's maybe add a second screen just to highlight this. Instead of increment counter, we're gonna just push a page. Navigate out of context, and we're just gonna push a route. I'm just using basic components here, nothing too fancy. Again, in a real application, you might do something else. But just so you can see what a hot restart is.
Yeah.
And I will not increment, or we can also increment the counter still. That's also fine. And maybe give the app bar title so we can see that we're on a new screen. Second screen, and let's just, again, I'm just like hot reloading the content of the function.
Yeah.
And now if I push, we get the second screen.
Mm-hmm.
Now what we can do, we can go ahead here. We change the color to yellow. That's the screen below it.
Yeah.
If I now hot reload the stuff and then go back, we see it's yellow. And now I'm going to do a hot restart and a hot reload. And now you will see that the app is like completely restarted and we are at this state again.
Yeah.
So I can, if I'm somewhere in my app, I just want to, hey, now start it again. I just press the run button again.
You screwed up, you're in the wrong workflow, you messed it up entirely, the state of the app is broken, you just hit hot restart and you get a fresh state while not having to wait for it completely recompiling, completely reinstalling. I get it.
This is also still a time saver. So because I remember back in the days where hot reload was sometimes maybe a little rougher. So instead of like completely compiling your entire application, we just did a hot restart, and that always worked. And again, it's not a huge downside to just do a hot restart. I mean, of course, when you are like, I don't know, like on the 6th screen of your onboarding flow, it's shitty to hot restart, but it's still better than to completely compile your entire application again and run it again. So this is also a cool developer experience.
Absolutely. I think I now understand a lot about why people really like this technology. So thank you very much, Julian. And maybe we can actually just jump on another call and do more in-depth, like looking into how Flutter does the platform channels and how it would work if I have to bridge into the operating system, calling some system APIs. So thank you very much, Julian, for that.